Once we have Photoshop back to its factory defaults and its basic settings, we can go ahead and take a look at some of the preferences that we might want to adjust as we begin working. Now, you might want to do this now, or you can come back to this at a later point, but I'm going to briefly walk through the different preference settings just so that you can see them and that you're aware of them. And as we go through the course, we might change some of them at a later time. So if you go back up to Edit and then go down to Preferences, and we can click on General, we'll see all of our preferences here. We can see we have our basic color pickers, so we're just going to use Adobe's color pickers. Most of this stuff we can pretty much leave at its default settings, but there's some things you might want to do, such as auto update open documents as you're working on them, and showing start workspace when no documents are open, and things like that. But let's keep moving down the list. So we have the interface. We can change our color theme, so we can actually make this darker or lighter depending on how we like to work, and you can change all kinds of other things here, such as how it shows the screen mode, the full screen mode, your artboards, what text you're using, and the language, and then other options such as showing channels in color, dynamic color sliders, and show menu colors. I'm going to leave all these here for now. We'll take a look at the workspace under preferences. This is talking about how the panels are handled. So do we want to auto collapse them? Do we want to auto show hidden panels, open documents as tabs, and so forth? We can leave these as is. We can take a look at the tools. Same thing with the tools here. Do we want to see tooltips? Do we want to enable gestures, such as if we're using a tablet or something of that nature while we're working? When we're zooming, does it resize the window? And can we zoom with the scroll wheel? That might be something that you're interested in. We have the history log. This will actually save a log of everything that you're doing. If you would like to have that information, you can do that here. How it handles files and file previews, as far as camera raw preferences. Also, if you're dealing straight with a camera and you have a raw file, how are we going to handle those preferences, and how are we going to handle files? Again, we'll leave all these as is. How we are exporting our formats. So if we're doing a lot of PNGs, we want to have our quick export format set to PNG. We can select one of these other ones. Maybe you're doing a lot of JPGs and you want the quick export to be that. You can change that here. You can also have transparency turned on or off, and a smaller file size turned on or off. And then the quick export location, you can ask where you want it to be exported, or just tell where that folder is going to be. And then there's the metadata and the color space. We'll leave that as is. Under performance, we can talk about how much we actually want Photoshop to use as far as memory. So as you can see here, we're not using only but 70% of the 3 gigs of memory available. We could bump that up if we needed more memory power. We can also adjust the graphics processor here. Something that you might want to change here is the history states. So this is going to talk about how many times you can go back in the history. If you are going back a lot, you might want to change this to a higher number, such as 100 or 200. And then the caching, as far as caching the files for your GPU, but we'll leave all this the same also. Your scratch disk is basically showing where it's going to keep information on your disks. So here we're just using the C drive. It has a lot of free space available. It's our startup file. I have other drives that I could add in here to help out with that, but we don't need to add anything there. Our cursors, how we want our cursors to look. Are they going to be standard, the cursor, the precise cursor, or the normal brush tip? A quick note, you can actually hit the tab button when dealing with your cursor and it will change this. So when we're using a brush, we have the normal brush tip. If we hit tab, it actually changes it to the precise, but you can set those here if you would like to see how those look. You can add the crosshairs and other things of that nature, and also your brush preview, what color you want that to be. We'll just leave it to the default red. Your transparency settings, so whenever we don't have a background, what does the transparency look like? If you don't like the black and gray, the white and gray checkerboard colors, you could change those maybe to a light blue or something else that lets you know that this is actually transparency that we're looking at. I'll just leave it to the light there, but as you're working with different images, you might find yourself changing this to something else so that you know what the transparency looks like in your image. Units and rulers is probably going to be something that you might want to change. Also the guides, grid, and slices that we'll look at next. For here, I'm using standard. It's in inches, but I'm going to change that to pixels. You might want to change it to metric if you're using metric, or if you want to use pixels, you can do that too. The type I usually leave in points. The column size for any units or rulers that you're using, I usually just leave these as is. They're fine. Whenever you launch a new document, for print resolution, 300 pixels per inch is pretty common. 72 pixels per inch for screen resolution is pretty common. You can make those numbers higher or lower depending on what you need. And then how you want the point or picket size to be. I use the PostScript. 72 points per inch is fine. And then under guides, grid, and slices, sometimes I might change these around. You'll see me come in here and mess with this a little bit, but you can change how the guides look and how the grid looks. We'll take a look at this a little bit later, so I'll show you that. But for instance, the grid, I might subdivide up the grid a little more. Maybe I want more subdivisions, or I don't want the grid line every inch. I want it every 2 inches. You can do that here. You can add in any plugins or have the plugins generated from your computer and where you have them listed. Then we have type options. Again, nothing really needs to be changed here. We have 3D options. Again, how much are we using to render out those 3D images. And then finally at the bottom, technology previews. And this is just whenever they are introducing new things into the platform, how those are working. So we will leave that all is. Typically, I might change things such as the history, or how many times you can go back in the history, or I might change the cursor, or the transparency guides, or the units, or the grids. But basically, that is your preferences. I just wanted to give you a quick rundown so you can see all of those here. I'm going to hit OK and save those. As soon as I do, you can see we went from standard measurement to pixels now, which is what I like to work in. And then you can also change some other things. If you go back into edit at the top and go all the way to the bottom, we have some more things here, such as PDF presets, color settings, different profiles for your color settings, keyboard shortcuts you can actually change if you don't like the keyboard shortcuts, and how we deal with menus and toolbars. Now I'm just going to leave those as is for now. I suggest that if you want to change any of that stuff, you go ahead and take a look at it, or check out the documentation on Adobe's website, which will help you more with that. But I'd like to move forward into the course, but I wanted to let you know that that is all there available to you to change if you would like to do so.